everyone. Hello. Hey, there's the Pomfret welcome we're looking for. It was like this morning. We had kind of a slow start and then a better response. You're getting better. It's so nice to welcome you all to this portion of Family Weekend. And I hope that your mornings and early afternoons have been productive and interesting, informative, all of those good things as you've been able to spend perhaps a little time in your children's classes and meeting with teachers and advisors and all of that good stuff. I am really excited to welcome you this afternoon to hear from our W.P. Carey speaker. The W.P. Carey speaker is our annual lecture series that brings students and your children this morning and you now face-to-face with a prominent admission officer from around the country. The Carey speaker is funded through the W.P. Carey Foundation, and specifically this series is funded through the W.P. Carey Fund for Excellence in College Counseling at Pomfret School, which was established in 2014 by the late Bill Carey, Pomfret class of 1948. Mr. Carey served as president of the Board of Trustees, a member of the Board of Trustees, president of the Alumni Association, and he was an honorary life trustee. And in addition to his amazing service to the school, Bill had created during his lifetime several endowed funds at the school, including the William Polk Carey Scholarship Fund, the William Polk Carey Chair in Mathematics, the W.P. Carey Fund for Excellence in Admissions, and the W.P. Carey Fund for Excellence in College Counseling. I am pleased at this time to introduce Mr. Grant Gosselin as our 2024 Carey speaker. Mr. Gosselin has been the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions and Financial Aid at Boston College since 2023. He began his career in undergraduate admission at Boston College, where he served as Senior Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admission and Associate Director of Marketing and International Admission before going on to Babson College and Wheaton College. As Chief Enrollment Officer at Babson and Wheaton, he set historic highs in applications and in enrolled students, as well as in international student recruitment. Mr. Gosselin returned to Boston College in 2018 as Director of Undergraduate Admission, and over the next 5 years, he has been instrumental in a host of impressive achievements for the Eagles. Undergraduate applications rose 20%, the admission rate dropped from 28 to 15%, and the yield rate exceeded 40%, a new BC record. Mr. Gosselin earned his undergraduate degree from Boston College's Carroll School of Management and a graduate degree from their Lynch School of Education and Human Development. He is also parent to two current undergraduates at BC. Yeah. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Grant Gosselin to Pomfret School.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks to the Pomfret community for the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor to speak with you and to try to offer some thoughts on my nearly 30-year career in higher education, but also more recently as a parent guiding students through this process, which is humbling and eye-opening all at the same time. I understand some of you may have some presentations or conferences that you need to step out of for, so if that is the case, please, you will not bother me. If I put you to sleep and you just need to leave, just keep those comments to yourself, and you can do that too. But you know, I had a chance to talk with your sons and daughters earlier today, and tried to help them, as I will try to help you, really frame this college search in a really positive light. Because what we know is that this process is exciting, that you're thinking about the places where your children might be spending the next 4 years and set them up for a really successful life ahead. But it also comes with some anxiety, right? You're hearing these statistics of, you know, improved selectivity, and you're probably saying, you know, I wish it wasn't like that, right? That colleges have become more competitive over the years. And so I want to try to help you understand why that is, and also set that in context in terms of a national reality. So what I thought I might do is to just kind of walk you through a little bit about where I grew up and my journey going to college, which was some time ago. But as I said to the students, there's a reason why I'm planning to go about it in this way. But this, thanks to Google Earth, is the street I grew up on right outside my home. I grew up in Southampton, New Hampshire, which when I was living there in the late 70s, early 80s, had a population of 806 people. It has since, of course, exploded in terms of its population. There are now 893 people in Southampton, New Hampshire. But I grew up with a pretty simple life. There are some advantages to going and living in rural America. I could wander the streets. This is one of 7 roads in my town, and this is the busy street, right? So you had to be 10 years old to ride your bike on the busy street. This is where the lumber trucks came. We had 2 stores in our town, a corner store and a lumberyard. That was pretty much it. It was a pretty residential place. But, I spent my summers, my time in the woods building forts, really, being creative. And there was really no exposure to kind of the greater world, right? And I think that was what, as a child, I didn't realize I was missing, but until I went off to college, certainly, I began to appreciate that. As I talk about my own upbringing, Southampton is a small place. I didn't grow up with a lot of money in my family. I would never say we were low income, but we were lower middle income, right? We had what we needed, but we didn't have a lot, right? And we didn't always have what we wanted. When we went to the grocery store, Mom had cash in her hand, and if what was in the cart couldn't be paid for by cash in hand, things went back onto the shelves. I grew up, we got our clothes through yard sales and thrift shops, but we got 2 outfits brand new every single year. One on Christmas morning and one on the first day of school. And education in my family was critically important. My parents had a kind of a different route to education. My father was the first in his family to go to college. We grew up in a pretty big family. My grandparents were immigrants from Canada. My grandmother was one of 21 siblings. My grandfather was one of 15. My father had a small family. He was the youngest of 9. But I had 32 first cousins that lived all within about a 10-mile radius of where I lived. So family was important. Family structure was important. I grew up in a home with a strong faith. We went to church each week. We really viewed some of the problems in the world through the lens of faith, and that could help us process it and have hope moving forward. I had a lot of ideals, I think, that were taught to me by my parents. But my father was the first in his family to go to college. He did grow up poor. He didn't have any money for college. And he went to college through the military. It was the only way he could afford to go. But he spent his college careers cornering his meals, right? Being told when to go to bed, when to wake up. He didn't have a traditional college experience as your sons and daughters are likely to have. My mother didn't go to college until after I did. She went to community college and got her nursing degree when she was 55 years old. It was her dream to get a degree. She served as a nurse for about 10 years. I'm so proud of what she's accomplished. But education was always important in our household. And so as I was thinking about heading off to college, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but these are some of the values that I've talked a little bit about already that were really important to me in my search. And we talk a lot in higher education and college admission and counseling here in the office about finding the right fit, right? That your children are looking at all of these great institutions and they're trying to find the one that's going to be the best match for them. And we often talk about fit in terms of the size of the school. Is it a small school or a larger school that is going to be the right fit for your student? We'll talk about fit in terms of location, right? Do you want more of an urban campus or one that is more rural in location? But I think that the best way to help your children go through this process is to think about their values, right? Because each institution that they'll be looking at has a mission, right? That Boston College was founded by the Jesuits. Our mission is to educate students for the greater good, to use education to improve society. Here at Pomfret, the mission is about helping your students live lives of purpose and fulfillment, right? I mean, every institution at its core has a mission. And so if you can help your children think about the things that they value, it's going to be a really critical part of their college journey. They're going to help them understand themselves and what they're looking for. It'll help them perhaps begin to craft their personal statements. It might also then help them choose a college. So when I was looking at schools, back in the early 1990s, there were 6 colleges that we were asked to apply to. I only had 5 on my list, but my school counselor made me apply to a 6th. But back then, it was apply to 1 or 2 schools that seemed like they were aspirational, 2 or 3 schools that seemed like they were going to be a pretty solid, match for you, and then 1 that you thought, no problem, I'm going to get into that school. I'm going to have at least 1 option to pick from. I was fortunate. I was admitted to all 6 of the schools that I applied to, and the 3 that I ultimately came down to deciding between was Cornell University, Boston College, and Boston University. And I really reflected on those values looking back, at trying to figure out what was the right environment for me. Community, as I talked about, growing up in a small town, growing up in a place with strong family ties, that was really going to be an important part of my experience. And so Boston College and Cornell, they kind of won there, right? Not that Boston University doesn't have great community, but it's a much bigger environment, harder to find the community that I was looking for. But I also had lived in rural America, right? So I was looking for something a little bit more cosmopolitan. And so Boston College and Boston University fit that mold a little bit better than living in upstate New York, right? And as I began to go through each of the elements of my search, I ultimately ruled out Cornell first. It was too close to what I grew up with. I wanted to be near a city. I knew that. Boston University felt a little bit too urban for me. Now, there's a story about my dad that I think is important to talk about here as well. My father, when he finished his service work, he worked as an entry-level engineer. And he served in that role for 23 years. Not to be stereotypical, but the stereotypical engineer of the 1970s and 80s was very good in math, very bright, with very few social skills, right? And no knock at my dad, I love my dad, but he didn't have the personality to move up into a leadership role, and he struggled to stay in that entry-level job throughout his 23-year career. When I was in high school, work dried up in the Northeast, and so they shipped him around the country in 8 to 12-month stints at different power plants throughout the country, and we would only see him every 2, 3, maybe every 4th weekend where he'd be able to come home and see the family. And so it was a really challenging time. In my junior year, my father was laid off from his work, and it was an incredibly difficult time for our family, incredibly difficult time for him as the sole breadwinner. My mother had done all the odd jobs that she could. She ran a daycare out of our home when we were really little. She ran a quilt shop with my aunt because it was their dream. They didn't make much money, but they tried that. She put my brother through Phillips Exeter by working at the Exeter Inn at the front desk. Every Christmas Eve, every Christmas Day, she was there. But that's how my brother got his education in high school. And so when my father lost his job, it was a difficult time. It was about 1.5 years before he found another one. And he ultimately found his dream job. It ended up being his dream job. He didn't know it. He was a manager, finally, but he was the night manager of buildings and grounds at Boston University. He worked with a custodial staff, about 200 folks that he managed, and he worked the 11 to 7 shift, traveling from New Hampshire to Boston. But he was never happier, right? When he came home, he was a different person. He was talking about, all the things that he was seeing at the university that he just didn't have in terms of his college experience, talking about the students that he met. He got us really excited about college. And so Boston University was going to be the best affordable option for me. But my heart was really pulling me toward BC. And so I went and I struggled a bit. Now I'm going to tell you something I did that I didn't know was a wrong at the time. And I'm going to tell you, don't do this. Don't let your kids do this. I sent in 2 deposits. And I had deposited at Boston College and Boston University. Boston University because that was where I could afford to go. Boston College at the time did not have the strong financial aid support that we do today. We weren't able to meet the full need of every student, and so the package that I initially received just wasn't going to work for me. My mother was determined to find a way to get me there, and she called the financial aid office every week, even though I was already enrolled, and said, I don't know if we're going to be able to afford this. You know, he's not going to be able to come. I walked across the stage at graduation heading to Boston University. By the end of June, BC came through, and I was off, right? But that was my journey, trying to figure out, again, how do my values align with the institution? And I was really fortunate to have my mother there supporting me along the way. When I got to BC, I had one goal. Why was I going to college? I was going to college to make money. That was my number one reason for going to college. And I set out to study finance because I thought that was the very best way to achieve that. And I went through the curriculum, and I was very good at it. I earned strong marks. I was moving along that path that I thought was the right one for me. But there were symbols and things that I was noticing along the way that were sending me signals that maybe this wasn't the right path, right? My friends would show up at breakfast with the Wall Street Journal, and they'd be reading it, and I had no interest in reading the Wall Street Journal. They'd be talking about cases that we were doing in class at dinner time. And I just kind of wanted to talk about other stuff, other classes that I was in. But it wasn't really, I wasn't as excited about the material as my friends were. But I was still on this journey. I was still on this path. And so at the middle of my junior year, companies started coming to campus, interviewing us. And I had the opportunity to interview for General Electric. I guess my clicker's running out of battery. So let's try this. And as you might remember, General Electric in the 1990s was one of the top 10 companies in the country. I was interviewing for the financial management program, which was pretty much the fast track to be a VP, pretty early on in your career. And I had set a goal when I came into college that my goal was to make $1 million by the time I was 30, right? It was very clear that's why I was going to college. And I got the job offer, the internship at General Electric. I headed out to the plastics headquarters in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I had a dream internship. I reported directly to the chief financial officer. I worked on a $43 million savings campaign as an internal auditor. I was calling people at plastics plants all over the world, asking about inventory and figuring out their cost savings measures. We wrapped up that project early in the summer, ahead of schedule. So they gave me another job. This one, I think, was just to see how I could do with it, but I was asked to audit the personal chauffeur of the CEO. I did. Found a few things that were off, but mostly it was fine. And at the end of the summer, I got offered a job, and I would be working at GE when I graduated, making more than my father was making at the time. And I came back to BC really confused, because everything that I had been working toward had come true. And I was going to be on this track that I thought that I wanted. But when I came back, I was really unsettled, and I really wasn't sure that this was the right path. And at Boston College, 20 years ago or so, a priest by the name of Father Himes, the late Father Himes, gave a sermon that really today serves as the core foundation for how we try to help students find where their God-given talents align with what would bring them fulfillment in their lives, and try to find a career path that really will lead to a life of fulfillment. The questions hadn't been answered yet, but it was still part of the ethos at Boston College. Now the questions today, what brings you joy? Right? We ask our students all the time to think about those things that get them excited in the morning, whether they're societal issues, whether they're clubs and organizations that they're excited to join, the things that get them up out of bed and still get them thinking about them when they're heading off to sleep. What are those things in your life that bring you joy? Then what are you good at, right? You could be on a path to being a doctor, but if you don't like science, if you're not very good at chemistry, it's going to be hard to get there, right? It might not be the right path for you. And we have a lot of conversations with students about that. I've always thought I was going to be a doctor, and now I got my first C in biology, and I don't know if this is the right path. So finding what you're good at. And then lastly, what does the world need you to be, right? What are the challenges in the world that you look at that need the attention of the well-educated that can go out and make positive change in the world. And for me, in my decision, I was really good at finance, and there was certainly a need for it. They were going to pay me a lot of money, but there was no joy in what I was doing, right? And that was my real problem. So I turned down the job at GE. My dad thought I was crazy. My mom was, oh, you do what you love, you do what you love. And I decided to work in admission. And at that point, I changed my goal. My goal was no longer to make $1 million by the time I was 30 working in education. I don't think that's a realistic goal. But I began to say, my goal is to be a dean of admission by the time I'm 30. And I told your sons and daughters, it's okay to change your goals, right? You always should have goals, always be moving forward. But it's okay if you decide that one of the goals you thought was in your path pivots a little bit. And I missed it by 1 year. 18 years ago, I became dean of admission at Babson at the age of 31, but I achieved what I was looking for in pretty short order. I also told your students that one of the pieces of advice that I give to every new hire that I make is to find the thing in the office that nobody else wants to do and become an expert in it. And you'll always have value to that organization. And for me, that was international admission. When I worked at Babson College in my very first job out of BC, in my second year, I was 23 years old, the person that was supposed to go to Latin America was pregnant and couldn't make the trip, and they asked me to go. So I raised my hand. I really hadn't been out of the country much at all, and this was just an incredibly exciting opportunity. The next year, I went back and worked at Boston College, and the person that had overseen international recruitment for 20 years left. And there was nobody on staff that was experienced and nobody on staff that wanted it. At that time, we read files on paper. They were twice as thick if they were international students because of the global curriculums, really needing to understand the very different educational approaches in different parts of the world. So I raised my hand, I'll do it. You know, and we weren't traveling yet at the time at Boston College. We weren't traveling internationally, but I took the very first trip in 1999. And I've had the great fortune of traveling to 42 countries throughout my career and recruiting students and talking with students. I've been to some pretty cool places. I've taken all these pictures. Actually, I didn't take Machu Picchu because when I went there, we still had film. It wasn't digital yet, but I took that one off the website. But everything else I took or someone took of me. But I said to your students, you know, these pictures are the equivalent of what they show their friends on Instagram, right? These are the good times. These are the happy things. But the reality is at every one of these places, this is what most of the environment looks like, right? That most of the world does not have the opportunity that your sons and daughters will have. They will sit among the top 7% of the global population that will have access to a higher education. That puts them in rarefied company. And when this process begins to become overwhelming, when students become disgruntled or discouraged by admit rates and things like that, keep it in perspective, right? Because everywhere I would go, there would be swarms of students coming out. I remember I was at a college fair in Cairo where there were 15 colleges in a room probably not much larger than this space on the floor here, and they put an ad in the local paper, American colleges coming to Cairo. There were 1,000 people that showed up in that ballroom. I couldn't even move. There were people all around. And they would come to the table, and I was representing Babson at the time, a business school, and they would say, pharmacy? Very little English. Pharmacy? No, we're a business school. Pharmacy? No, we're a business school. Business. Okay, I'll do business, right? And they just wanted an education. They didn't really even care what they would study. But keep this in mind. This perspective, I think, is really important for students and even for parents as you're navigating this search. Now, this process has changed a lot since any of you went to college. When I was applying to college in 1992, the national demographics were very different than they are today, right? There were about 2.5 million high school graduates in the entire United States. A fraction of those obviously went to college, but over the course of the next 30 years, the population has grown, and this year will be at an all-time high at just under 4 million students, right? And so what has happened during that time is that there has been not only a growth in the number of high school graduates, but there's been a growth in behavior that has changed. So when colleges were struggling for enrollment in the early 1990s, what did they do? They began to market more. When I first got into admission, you couldn't say the word marketing in an academic setting. We don't market. This is about exposing students to what we have to. It was a dirty word, right? Marketing began, right? Mailboxes became flooded. I'm sure you're seeing it with your own children, with the amount of mailers that come in or the amount of email that they get. I'm sure they don't read the vast majority of. But colleges got used to this and never stopped. And then the internet made it easier. Late 1990s, the Common Application went online, and it made it easy to just add another school to your list. And so students that used to apply to 6 schools, if that was the norm, began applying to just a few more. It coincided with the rankings taking on an increased level of importance. At one point, selectivity measures were included in the ranking methodology. They're not anymore, but that caused colleges to want to artificially lower their acceptance rate and encourage more applicants, even if they might not have been as qualified, but that would help them become more attractive in the eyes of candidates. Bond ratings, believe it or not, are set on selectivity rates. So this is a big industry, right, that is really impacted. And I think colleges own some of the blame for the growth that has happened, particularly in marketing. But then you all remember the market crash in 2008, right? And there were so many families that had saved diligently for college. They had 529s, and overnight they lost 40% of their value. And these families that had done everything right found themselves really struggling at that point in time to find places for their children. And so that list of 6 became 12. College counselors, school counselors were advising their students, don't just pick the 6 academically that are the right fit or reach or match schools, but now you need to have some financial security right in there, and you need to add some schools on your list that you know you can afford, as well as those schools that you want to get to. And so lists became expanded. Well, students are applying to more schools, admit rates become more difficult to manage. Colleges, after the market crash, started shifting their resources away from need-based aid to merit-based aid. When I was applying to college, most merit scholarships were truly meritocracy, where students were applying for a very small number. Now there are a significant number of schools that will discount their pricing through merit scholarships to a much larger group of students. Behaviors in early applications shifted, right? Students and families responded. Well, if it's going to be harder to get in, how do I find a way to maximize my chances? And applying early decision became more in vogue, and more students were considering that. We know the influence of social media. I think that's really playing itself out right now as students are getting messages about so many colleges around the country that perhaps they might not have been exposed to previously. And then all the while, the population continues to go up. So for those of you that have children in elementary school, if any of you have younger children, like, the world's going to get better in a couple years, right? We're going to start going back down, right? But this moment in time does feel a little bit challenging. So let me try to help you with that as well. So I want to play a game with you. Are you up for it? Yeah. All right. So fact or fiction, just by a show of hands, I'm going to give you the question and I'll survey you. Most colleges and universities deny most of their applicants. Fact. Okay, fiction. It's fiction, right? So the average admit rate in this country is about 2/3. Most colleges are admitting most of their applicants. Only 2% of colleges have admit rates below 25%, right? So we live in a part of the country where, and particularly your students go to a school where attending top universities is the norm, right? In many parts of the country, students are not applying to the most selective institutions, and many institutions outside of that top echelon of schools are struggling right now to fill their classes, right? As the demographics begins to move in the other direction, it's going to be harder and harder. And so most colleges have to admit many of their applicants in order to bring in their classes each year. All right, most college applicants are admitted to their top choice college. How many think that's fact? All right, and fiction. Okay, and that's also a fact. Okay, so just like I said before, right, it's not the norm to apply to highly selective admission offices, right? It is the norm to apply to your local state institution, your local regional institution. It is the norm to apply to schools that are not more than 250 miles from home. So very few students nationally actually travel a great distance to go to college. And so again, just keeping that mindset, I think, is important because you've got an incredible college counseling staff here. And your sons and daughters are going to have brand name schools that they're aware of. But there are going to be some schools that the counseling staff will recommend that are worthy of their consideration. They might not know the name, right? But the counseling staff does, right? They've been on their campuses. They've been at national conferences. They're going to recommend some schools that perhaps 30 years ago, like, why would you go? Like, that's not a competitive school at all. Well, maybe they are now, right? Maybe they've evolved over these last number of years, and they really are worthy of your children's attention. So keep that in mind. Keep an open mind, and ask your students to keep an open mind as they go through this process as well. All right, this one you'll get. Fact or fiction? Private colleges and universities are less affordable than public institutions. Fact? Fiction? All right. I got you all, right? It depends. This slide is really important because the experience that students and families will have around financing college is going to be dramatically different family to family. Generally speaking, the sticker prices at private institutions are going to be higher than the sticker prices at public institutions. Public institutions are subsidized by state governments. Their costs are able to come down. The difference, though, is that private institutions often have larger endowments, and they have larger budgets for both need-based financial aid and, in some institutions, for merit scholarships. Whereas many of those public institutions have already been subsidized and aren't going to have as deep a pool for financial aid beyond that. And so it's really important to have these conversations with your students. I think one of the most challenging things for a family is if your son or daughter gets into the school that they want and you're not going to be able to make it work financially. And you have that conversation in April as they're trying to make their decision instead of in November or October before their list is finalized. And so I think it's a really healthy conversation to have. If you are in a fortunate position where this is not going to be an issue, that's really great, right? But there might be some of you that say, you know what, I don't know that I'll qualify for financial aid, but a merit scholarship is probably going to be really important, right? And so keeping in mind those colleges that are going to have larger percentages of their classes with merit scholarships might be helpful. And then there might be families that financial aid is going to be important. And so looking at those resources at each college and university is also a really important thing to do. All right, last one. The highly selective college admission process is not fair. Fact? Fiction? It's a fact. It's a fact. And it's not a fact because our process is arbitrary. It's not a fact because we don't know what we're doing. It's a fact because the very nature of a highly selective institution means that we have far more qualified candidates applying than we have room to admit. And if your children choose to enter that highly selective space, you all need to be prepared for the possibility that there could be some disappointment, right? And again, you've got a staff here that's going to help work them through that. You don't have staff that's going to crush dreams and say, don't apply there, right? If your student has that goal, I would say give it a shot, right? But there's going to be another group of schools in a well-formed list that will make sure that they're able to move through that disappointment as quickly as possible. What we never want is for any student to feel as though getting difficult news from a college or university means that that college doesn't want them, doesn't believe they were talented enough, doesn't believe they were strong enough in the context of the pool. We are in the very difficult position of having to turn away students that we would love to have at our schools, and that's a reality. So I think it's important to be honest and upfront about that right now. All right, I'm going to give you some more rules, things that I've learned from the road. How many of you have brought your sons and daughters through driver's ed? Okay? And is this how you felt when you first got in the car with your son or daughter behind the wheel for the very first time? Is that how you imagined you would feel? Yeah? And is this how you actually felt? Because that's how I actually felt. I have 3 daughters, but that's how I felt, right? I was twisted in knots with anxiety, with nerves, right? But I think when you put these 2 pictures together, there are a lot of lessons here that I think are good for the college process, right? And the first is that a solid college search is built on a strong foundation, right? And you've invested in sending your children to Pomfret, and they are going to be just fine. The tires on the car on the right are a solid foundation, right? And I think sometimes people lose sight of that, and they worry that their students aren't going to be ready, right? The colleges and universities that admit your sons and daughters, they're not going to admit them to fail. They're going to have full confidence that they're ready to succeed. When they go off to these selective institutions, imposter syndrome is a real thing, right? I see it all the time. These incredibly talented students that come in and they look around and they say, everybody's smarter than me and everybody's more popular and everybody looks happier. And maybe I made the wrong decision. They're ready. They have that strong foundation, so remember that. As parents, we're really good at keeping track of time, and we're really good at reminding our children that they're not keeping track of time, right? Do your best to minimize the reminders about when applications are due and when you need to get out on college visits, right? Set up some time. I recommend finding 1 day a week where you might check in about college. It's easier if they're boarders. You're not going to see them all the time. But if they're living at home, don't talk about college every day, right? Don't talk about college every time you get on a call with them. Because if that becomes your life, it's going to get in the way of your relationship with your son or daughter, right? They're going to have good advisement here. They're going to be on track. But also, there needs to be a level of trust in your student and some confidence that comes with that giving of trust for them. The picture on the left has a rear view mirror, right? There's no rear view mirror on a good college search, right? Your son or daughter knows if they got a B- in freshman year, right? Reminding them of that over and over is not going to help, right? And so I encourage you to always be looking forward with your children, looking at how they can continue to grow and develop their application, to continue to take strong curriculums as they get older in their time here at Pomfret, but trying as best you can to really be focused on the future. Keep in mind the eyes of the child in these pictures, right, related to their parent, right? If you are showing your stress, your children are going to see that, right? You want your children looking straight ahead on the road. You don't want them looking at you, right? And so this is stressful for parents. I get it. I lived through it. It is stressful, and I don't want to minimize that. The extent you can try to keep that within, keep that with your other relationships and not with your student that's going through the process, I think you're going to have a more successful experience. And lastly, if you need just an emotional support system here, just take a teddy bear and hold on to it for the ride. But it's going to be a journey that ends up headed to a good place. Let me just give you some tips, and then I'll be happy to open it up for questions if you might have them. But I think first of all, the most important thing before you begin this journey is to define what success looks like, right? Because some people go into this process thinking success looks like ending up at an Ivy League institution, right? And that might be your reality of where your mindset is. But I would imagine if you really began to think about it, ensuring that your student is happy and successful is probably even higher on the list than going to an Ivy League or a similarly selective institution, right? And keeping that in mind, I think at the beginning of the process is going to be really helpful because it's human nature. We're going to want to encourage our students to go to certain places, but we really have to let them figure out what the right place is for them. Think about the relationship that you want at the end of this process, right? I think that goes back to not talking about it every day, not nagging about certain deadlines, things like that, but really trying to give some space And again, setting aside one day a week where you might have conversations about it keeps it from being talked about all the time. And then I do think trying to get your students into the mindset, and I talk to them about it as well, but cataloging their values. What's important to them? Go through their own life story to this point in time, right? What are the things that they remember with fondness about their childhood? What are the things that they value in the friendships that they have? It'll help them through this process of self-discovery figure out, how to write their essays, how to focus in on not only their search and their choice, but really staying true to their core and not being distracted by outside messages. So I'm going to show you 10 tips, but I think these are the two most important, right? And really thinking about using your students' success model as focused on their happiness. Build and encourage self-sufficiency skills, right? Your sons and daughters are going to have very different approaches in terms of this search. You might have a student who, when you go and show up on a campus for a campus tour, they're leading the pack, they walk right up and they introduce themselves to the receptionist, and you might have one that is very happy to have you do that, right? Encourage them to do that. Encourage them to take the lead, because shortly after they get on that campus, you're not going to be there. And they're going to have to go up to the registrar to ask for a transcript, or they're going to have to go into the billing office because their meal card isn't working, or something is going to come up where they're going to have to advocate for themselves. And the extent to which you can help them get there before they go to college, I think, will be valuable. There's a very common saying that we talk about a lot, right, in this process, is putting your best foot forward. We have a Jesuit on campus, Father Tony Penna, who speaks to our parents at orientation every year. I went through it as a parent, as I listened to him, and he said, I hate this phrase, right? Because what this phrase suggests is that our God-given talents, the things that we're really good at, the things that come naturally to us, are going to define us for the rest of our lives. He said, at Boston College, we're far more focused on your weak foot, right? That foot that you're not as confident with, those skills perhaps that aren't as well developed, right? We want to make sure that your sons and daughters have two strong feet when they head out in this world. And so focusing on those elements of their development as a young person as they're going through this process will make them that much stronger when they get to college and that much more successful. Don't follow advice from your friends. A little bit maybe, but not fully, because what happens with one student isn't necessarily going to happen the same way as another student, and each of your sons and daughters are different. You may have friends that really feel as though the strategies that they used were the reason their children went to college. Every year, I will have someone send me recommendations from everyone they know at least once a week for an entire year. Sometimes that student gets into BC, sometimes they don't. But when they do, I guarantee that person's telling everyone they know, send a recommendation letter every single week for a whole year. That's what got my son into college. It's not, trust me. So you never know, right? But really try to focus in what's right for your family, what's right for your son and daughter. Have any of you gone through this process already? Okay. Are your children the exact same? Okay. So my two daughters, dramatically different. My oldest is studying nursing. She was very focused with her search. She knew exactly where she wanted to apply. She ultimately went early decision one. She was so clear. My second daughter, she's really smart, right? Did very well. We couldn't get her to talk about college at all, right? Okay, Emma, it's time to apply to college. Like, where you get? I'll get there. And we didn't figure out until the end of her high school career when she walked across graduation and the next day was online in the chat rooms with the students at Boston College that she was actually excited about BC. She just loved high school so much she couldn't imagine moving on, right? Whereas my oldest daughter was right in the middle of COVID. She kind of had some mean girls in her class. She didn't have a great social setting. She was looking at college much earlier on, right? We don't fully understand why our students are the way they are going through this process, maybe until hindsight helps us out, but don't expect that they're going to both navigate this process in the same way, particularly if you have boys and girls. I don't have any boys, but I hear that boys and girls approach this process very differently. And then also discuss your expectations with each other, parent to child, right? Especially around cost, as we talked about before. If you have any things that are non-negotiable about where your student goes to college, it's better to voice that early. They're not going to necessarily be happy with you, but I think they'll be happier in November than they will in May, right? If that is, I don't want you to apply to an overseas university, I want you to stay in the United States, okay, well, that should be on the table, right? If that is, we've got $50,000 a year to put toward college and I don't have anything more to contribute, that needs to be a conversation, right? So engaging in that dialogue early, I think, is helpful. And also about how you want to work with each other through this process, right? Often, parents are really good at keeping schedules and keeping spreadsheets and deadlines and scholarship dates and all of that. If that's the role you want to play and your student says, yeah, you can do the busy work, that's fine. And that keeps you occupied so they can focus on writing their essays and interviewing and doing all of those things, that might be a healthy balance for you. But figure out what works for your family and make sure that all sides understand. Resist the temptation to talk only about college. I talk about that. Do everything you can to stay off social media around your student's college search, right? I always encourage families to be respectful of their children's space in this process. There are some that will be very happy for you to talk about it and others that will really not like that. So I encourage you to think about that as well. Make sure they know you're going to be proud of them no matter what result you get. I think that's underlying. I hope we all imagine that, but saying it out loud has meaning and has power. And then the last thing, this is an article that I read last year. I did it for my second daughter. I didn't do this for my first daughter because I hadn't thought about it. Celebrate the moment they submit their applications. Don't wait for them to celebrate once they get in. Because what you're doing unintentionally, if you only celebrate the end goal, is you're sending a message that you approve of the end result, and you have them wondering, well, what if I didn't choose that option? Would that have been still the same success? So make sure you know that, hey, you're applying to college, you've done all the hard work, there's going to be a great outcome regardless of how it plays out, but do what you can to celebrate the process and not just the outcome. Try to enjoy the ride, right? I was talking with Bruce earlier today, and we were talking about going through this process with your children. It's a pretty special time, especially if you go on road trips. We drove down to Philadelphia and stopped and spent a night in New York City and looked at some schools here in Connecticut. I'll have those memories forever, right? One-on-one time where just my daughter and I went off and, we went out and got a Philly cheesesteak and, I ran up the rocky stairs, which I thought was so much cooler than she did. But, build in some time for fun. Help them see the environment in which they might be living, should they choose that college. If you can build in time beyond just the standard college tour, I think it will really be helpful, not only for them, but also just for your relationship and the memories that you'll build along the way. So your children are going to go to college if that's their goal. They just don't know where that's going to be yet. And that journey should be part of the fun. So I know it will be stressful at times. Do everything you can to find a way to minimize it, but know that they're in good hands here at Pomfret. So thanks so much for your time.
We have a minute or two, or a couple minutes. Oh, and already. All right.
I have a question. So my oldest daughter is a freshman in college now, and she ended up going test optional, but she did do all the legwork and took the test. What are you seeing this next year? Any changes in schools test optional or not?
Yeah, so the question was around test optional and is this movement that's taken place since COVID began persisting, or are there changes that are happening? Over the last year, there have been a small number of very selective schools that have announced plans to return fully to testing. It has been a small number, and we talk about it all the time. I think that the reality is that standardized tests do have predictive value. They do help colleges to put a student's performance in context outside of their local community. But I also think there's a recognition and an acknowledgement that the world is not an equal place right now still, right? And for example, the state of California, the entire school system has gone test blind. So if you send scores to a public institution in California, they won't even look at them, It's not that they're going to, maybe look if you submit it. They won't look. And so what's happened in California is testing centers throughout the whole state have closed, right? Test prep centers have closed at record levels. And so if you're a student who lives in California and doesn't have a local test center, there are some who can afford to fly to another city and take a test, and there are some who can't, right? And so there's a real inequity around access if colleges begin to go back fully. We're trying to balance the two, right? We know there's predictive value. We have done our own internal research. We know that just about every metric, right, whether students have applied for aid or not, or are the first in their families to go to college or not, there is a bit of a difference in their performance. But we also want to respect the fact that there are some places that students just can't take them. So our policy at BC is if you've been able to take the exam, we recommend you submit them and trust that we're going to use them responsibly. We're going to use them in context, both locally, nationally. We also came to this because there were some inequities in how we were reading, to be honest, right? I'm being really transparent with you now. We work really hard to try to be ethical in everything that we do as an admission staff. I had staff, when a student said, I don't want my test scores submitted, and they accidentally submitted them on their Common App because another school wanted them, or they wanted to send them to another school, we had a dilemma. And I had half the staff who, from an ethical standpoint, said, the student said no, they don't want their scores, I'm not going to consider them. And we had the other half of the staff who fully ethically in their mind said, we know what the scores are. We have an ethical responsibility to use them because we know that they have predictive value, right? And so we had some staff that were considering them more than others, and that wasn't a place we wanted to be in terms of fairness to our applicants. And so we are recommending it. We also would see students that we would find out they said, no, I don't want my scores submitted, and they accidentally self-reported a 1450, right? That 1450 might be low in your particular school, but that still places you among the 96th percentile nationally, right? And that would be a good reason to submit scores, right? So students were really tying themselves in knots. We're trying to just simplify it for them. If you have them, submit them, and we are going to use them responsibly. But test scores never, even before test optional, they were never the sole reason that we would admit or deny a student. They're one factor of many. So, yeah.
Pomfret, selective schools.
Yes.
A lot of top students chasing the same schools.
Yeah.
So just picking up on one thing you said, and sorry, it's a negative question.
For sure.
9 fully qualified candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe give a little vignette? What goes through your mind? You're looking at a couple of candidates, and especially candidates who maybe come from similar type schools and chasing the same schools. Just
right.
What's in your head? That's what I'm trying to get.
Right, yeah, so we're looking to try to have a representative student body. I'll be honest, our student body isn't all that representative. So about 50% of our students come from public high schools. There are far more students in this country that attend public high schools than private, right? So we are acknowledging that there are schools from which students come that are more prepared. But the reality is when we look at our applicant pool, we might have 10 candidates that academically are all very similar, and we might have room for 2, right? And we have to split hairs. And I always say to families, I can never recreate that day in committee to explain why we didn't take your son or daughter. I can always tell the 2 I did take. I can always tell, this is the reason, right? When I was making decisions, it was this part of your application that really stood out among the rest. So we do try to think about that. We read geographically as a staff, and I make sure that every member of my staff doesn't only have all the prep schools in Connecticut, but they have applicants from, Chicago or from Delhi, India, or other places, so that we are making sure that we're not having any one region cancel each other out, right? And I think there are very few schools, selective colleges even, that are so selective that they're setting up quotas. We don't have any quotas by high school, right? There could be a year where we take 10 kids from Pomfret, and there could be a year where we take 1, right? And it doesn't mean that one class was particularly stronger than another. Just in the context of that pool, in that given year, that was the outcome. But we're trying to make sure that we're being careful and strategic in making sure that geographically we have a representative group in even our reader loads.